Hello everyone, this is Pierre Clérambault. So I would like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this special session. So today I will talk about joint work with Marc Devim, who's currently finishing a PhD with me in Lyon, and Glyn Winskell. And so this is Marc's PhD topic, so a lot of the work is actually due to him. Okay, so the talk is about game semantics for quantum programming languages. But more specifically, it's about game semantics for the quantum lambda calculus, which is a simple programming language that embodies the paradigm of classical control and quantum state. So let's start this talk by looking a little bit at the quantum lambda calculus, its syntax and semantics. So here's the syntax of the quantum lambda calculus. So if you first forget about the parts in green, the classical fragment has a unit type, tensor, sums, finite lists, linear functions which have to be applied exactly once, and nonlinear functions. So all these primitives in black are relatively standard primitives that go alongside with this type. So I won't comment on them very much. I will now focus on the green parts, which are the quantum bits. So there is a type qubit and three associated primitives. So first there is a new primitive which takes a bit, a boolean, and returns a new quantum bit initialized to this value. There is a measure operation which takes a quantum bit and performs a measure, returns a boolean. And in this version of the language, for every unitary transform, there is a corresponding primitive on the language acting on n qubits. Now the operational semantics are essentially what you would expect. So if you want to execute a term with n qubit free variables, you have to complete it with a quantum store that's going to store a unit vector in the Hilbert space of dimension 2 to the n. Now to perform the quantum reductions, so first if you want to apply a unitary transform, then you simply apply it to the quantum state. If you want to initialize a new qubit, then you tensor the state with the corresponding qubit and you return a fresh variable pointing to the new qubit. And if you want to perform a measure, then you first write your state as a superposition when on the left you have the part where the qubit is 0 and on the right you have the part where the qubit is 1 with complex coefficients alpha and beta. And then when you perform the measure, you're going to return false with probability norm of alpha squared and true with probability norm of beta squared. But then what's important to keep in mind is that when you write this decomposition, q and q prime do not have to be the same. This is because you might have some entanglement between the first qubit and the rest of the state. And then when you perform the measurement, it collapses the state accordingly. Okay. So this is quite natural stuff. And then this is a call by value programming language. So if you want to have the full reduction, then you have to close under call by value evaluation context. Because of the measure, this is a probabilistic reduction system, and so the next slide contains things that are relatively common for probabilistic systems. If you have a reduction path, then the weight of this path is simply the product of probabilities along it. If you have a term of unit type, then the probability that it converges is essentially the sum of the weight of all reduction paths leading to a value. And if you have two terms, then they are observationally equivalent if they have the same probability of convergence under any context. So when you do the notational semantics of this language, one of the best results that you can hope for is to have so-called full abstraction when the model exactly captures the observational equivalence relation on programs. We don't always have that. Sometimes we only have adequacy, which says that the model perfectly reflects the probability of convergence. But since we're going to talk about denotational semantics for this language, let's mention a little bit of history on that topic. So the quantum lambda calculus was introduced by Peter Selinger and Benoît Valliron in 2006. And shortly after, in 2008, they gave a fully abstract model for the linear fragment, so with only linear arrows. So the model was a byproduct completion of the category of finite dimensional Hilbert spaces and completely positive maps, which is a nice setting in which you can represent both pure quantum states but also mixed states, which are essentially probability distributions over pure states. Particularly important for this talk is the work by Yannick Delbecq in 2011. So he gave a game semantics model for a restriction of the quantum lambda calculus with restricted entanglement, and we'll come back to that later in the talk. So the first model, for the first denotational model for the full language came in 2014 by Michele Pagani, Peter Selinger, and Benoît Valiron, and it was based on the relational model of linear logic weighted by completely positive maps. Now in 2019 we gave a games model based on a brand of game semantics called concurrent games, which was also adequate for the full language and also weighted by CPM. And then later on, for a variation of this games model, we proved full abstraction. Okay, but what I'm going to spend the talk talking about is not exactly this 2019 games model, because that's based on concurrent games, which is pretty elaborate, and I'd rather focus on the important ideas of how one mixes the quantum data with the classical control offered by the game semantics. And for that, I'll focus on a simpler game semantics based on a sequential notion of strategy, but I'll come back to the concurrent things at the very end of the talk. Now let's talk about game semantics. But before I talk about quantum game semantics, I have to talk about the classical fragment of the model, which is a model of a call by value language with linear types and non-linear as well. There's many game semantics around, so I won't give a full introduction to that. Instead, I'll present game semantics by example and looking at a specific type and a specific program to see how they would be represented in the game semantics. So if we look at this type, for instance, how are we going to represent that in game semantics? So we're going to represent that with an arena, and the arena is the answer to the question, what are the observable computational actions on this type, and what are the causal dependencies between them? So because this is called by value evaluation, the first observable move that we can see is whether or not the program evaluates to a lambda abstraction. So the first move that will appear in this arena is this lambda plus here, a lambda which stands for the fact that the program is a lambda, and plus which stands for the fact that the action is due to the program as opposed to the environment. Then computation is stuck until the opponent feeds us a value for the argument, but the argument is itself a function, so this value is going to be a lambda abstraction as well. So here you can notice that there is a dotted line which indicates the fact that this new move here causally depends on this move over there. And then there's a minus which indicates that this is due to the execution environment rather than the program. From that point, several things can happen. So a program is perfectly able to directly return a value without feeding an argument to the input function. So we would have these two events here, true or false, and then you can notice that there is some kind of wiggly line between them which indicates the fact that the two conflict with each other. So you cannot have both of them in a consistent execution. Alternately, you could feed an argument to the input function, which may be either true or false, and then the function itself may return, which can only happen if the function has been called, hence this causal dependencies relations. Of course, there is a bank here, so this is a replicable function, can be used many times, and so this protocol has to be replicated countably many times to account for that. And here you'll notice that grayed out there are these little integers here, which in the jargon are copy indices and are only there to make up space in the game, but won't play a very big role in this talk. So formally, an arena is a big tuple as we do these things, with a set of events, a partial order causal dependency, a conflict relation that formalizes these wiggly lines, a polarity function which says for each event whether it's plus or minus, and there is a symmetry component which essentially is a way to express that all these copy indices are interchangeable. there's a bunch of axioms which correspond to the notion of event structure with symmetry. But they won't play, again, a big role in the talk. What I will use in the talk is this notion of configuration, which is a state of the game. And this is simply a finite set of events, which is done closed. So if you have an event, you need to have its causal dependencies before. And it's non-conflicting, meaning that you cannot have, for instance, both true and false together in a configuration. Okay, so this is the representation of types. And now let's look at the representation of programs. So a program is going to be a strategy on an arena. So in this case, the arena is the one from the previous slide. And then the strategy is going to be a collection of play, each play representing one particular execution. So let us look at one play of this strategy, of the strategy for this term. So in a play in general, the environment will start playing by feeding a value for the context. But here the context is empty. And so what we have at the beginning is just a dummy move by the opponent, by the environment, which triggers the beginning of computation. Then this program has the control. And because this program is already a lambda, we know that it converges to a lambda, and so it is going to immediately play this move lambda plus. Then computation is stuck until the opponent feeds us a value as an input, which is going to be a lambda minus. And then if we look at this program again, we will see that the first thing it does in a call by value evaluation is to feed the value true to the function f. And that's going to be this move over there. Now this call to f might return and say, for instance, that it returns the value false. This means that this call here has returned. And so we feed the return value to a new instance of f, like so. Finally, this may return, and we copy that at top level as the final result of computation. So overall, in this play, we have explored a configuration of the game highlighted here. And it's true in general. An execution formalized by a play is going to be a configuration along with an alternating chronological exploration of it. And then a strategy is a set of plays that satisfies a number of conditions but explains how the program behaves with respect to all execution environments. Okay, so this is classical game semantics in a nutshell. So now let's talk about how this could be enriched with quantum data. And first of all, we're going to adopt a slightly naive approach, which will help us motivate the final approach later on. So the naive approach is the following. So quantum data is data after all, so we should be able to represent it in exactly the same way as we usually do in game semantics. So to illustrate that, let's look at the following program. So it takes a function from qubits to qubits, it applies it to the qubit initialized to 0, then applies it to f again, and then performs a measure. So the play looks like this. The opponent starts computation, we already have a lambda, opponent feeds a value, and then the first thing we do is we feed the qubit 0. Then f returns some quantum value, and here you already see that the games will be uncountably infinite, but okay, that's not a big issue, we can deal with that. And so what we can do then, because this f has returned this quantum state, is to simply copy this state to the other call to f. Then we get a new quantum state, and now we perform the measurement, and this measurement might give us true or false. So let's say it gives us true, but then it gives us true with a certain probability that we have to have a new component for probabilities and say that we get true with probability norm of beta prime squared. So here we see that to do this we will need to have probabilistic strategies on top of games that have some quantum informations. For that we can use standard notions of probabilistic strategies, in particular the notion due to Vincent Danos and Russ Harmer that we'll see again later on in this talk. And since this is a probabilistic strategy, of course it also assigns a weight to all the earlier plays, but for now it's all been deterministic, so that's going to be ones everywhere. Interestingly, this is essentially, this is similar in spirit, at least to the approach followed by Yannick Delbecq in 2011, and we'll see very shortly why this means you cannot represent all entangled states. And that's because quantum state is, unlike classical state, is inherently non-local. So let's look at this program. We receive a function of type qubit hello 1, and we create an EPR pair. We assign x to the first qubit and y to the second qubit, and we feed these two qubits to the two arguments of f. Let's look at a pair, at a play in this program. Okay, so opponent prompts computation, we have a lambda. For now it's as usual, but then we have to remind you that this iterated function is bracketed like that implicitly. And in call by value, this is not innocent at all, meaning that these two arrows correspond to completely different convergences to a lambda. So when opponent gives us a lambda, it gives us a lambda for this arrow, and that gives us the possibility to give one qubit, but we cannot yet give the other qubit. We are forced to give only one qubit here. This is very important because here this is part of an entangled pair. So if we only give one part of this entangled pair, the only thing that is sensible to do is to imagine that we give x provided that we have measured y and thrown away the result, in which case we would get something like that. But now let's imagine that opponent returns the value for the second function and gives us the opportunity to provide the second qubit. But here you see the issue. There's nothing that makes sense here if we want to represent faithfully the EPR pair, because essentially this state cannot be written as a tensor of two spaces, and because in this approach the quantum state is carried by the game, two different components in the game must be independent in terms of entanglement as well. And this is not satisfactory if we want to represent the full quantum lambda calculus. So let's now look at what we're doing instead. The idea is that the model makes it explicit that we are following this classical control quantum data approach, and the model is going to keep them separate explicitly. The play, in the sense of game semantics, is going to carry the information about the classical control, and then on the side we will put the quantum data. So let's look at the play. So okay, it starts as usual, as before, but now instead of giving a full quantum state, we are just going to give one token. In other words, the game for qubit only has one move, q, which carries the information that we are giving the control flow, and we are giving one qubit, but we don't give the information of the qubit. However, this move does have some side information, and this is this little green C2 here. So a good way to understand it is as a side effect. Playing this move has the side effect of opening a little Hilbert space that we can use then to write quantum states on the side. So on the side of this move we will write this state, which corresponds to this part in the qubit. Now we can go on. And here we get to this point, and unlike before, we have not given explicit quantum states, we have just given the information that we open a new part of the Hilbert space. Now the ambient space, collecting all of the spaces that have been encountered up to this point, is C2 tensor C2, and we can give a weight, a quantum weight, that is a valid state on C2 tensor C2, so now we can give the full EPR pair. Okay, so this is the naive idea, at least this is the idea behind our game semantics. But now let's look at things a little bit more formally. So first, what is the interpretation of types? It's going to be a quantum arena, which is an arena as before, except that now we also have this new component, which for every move gives us a finite dimensional Hilbert space. And if you care about that, this must be invariant under symmetry. Here's an example in which you can see that all the moves that correspond to purely classical parts of the computation, they are weighted by the unit Hilbert space, which is just the field of complex numbers. The moves that correspond to giving a qubit, to the program giving a qubit, are weighted by C2, and the moves corresponding to opponent giving a qubit are weighted by the dual space C2 star, which is of course also isomorphic to C2. So events carry a Hilbert space. So if you have a configuration which is a set of events, it also comes with a space which is the tensor space. And if you have a play, then its space is simply the tensor space for all the events occurring in the play. So those are the arenas. Now let's look at strategies. So this is a part that I find really nice in the construction, because we'll see that it's tied very closely to the standard notion of probabilistic strategies in game semantics that was due to Vincent Danos and Russ Armour. So a quantum strategy from A to B is first a classical strategy, but to that we add a valuation which to every play is going to give us a completely positive map from the Hilbert space opened in A to the Hilbert space opened in B. So this needs to satisfy some axioms. First of all, if we have the empty play, then we have not opened any space on either side, so we have only the unit space, and then we put the identity, meaning that we don't do anything. This part is a lot more interesting. So in probabilistic game semantics, there is this idea that if we have a play from the strategy followed by an opponent move, then there is a probability distribution of all the player moves that the strategy might play from this current play. Formally, the way it's usually formalized is the fact that there is a probabilistic valuation on plays, and that if you have a play extended by an opponent move, then its valuation should be greater than the sum of the valuations of all the extensions by a player move. Of course, here we cannot quite write this, and this is because when we play B, B might be a qubit, or in general B might carry some quantum data, it might open up more of the Hilbert space. And so the different terms of the sum that we want to add with each other, they're not acting in the same space. So the sum doesn't type check. So what we do instead is that we trace out the part of the valuation that corresponds to the space that the event B has just added as a side effect. So we trace everything down to FA, which means that now everything has the same domain, so we can write the sum. And then this condition type checks, with this being the loaner order between CPM maps. And finally, if you want to compose strategies, then this turns out to be exactly the same formula as in the probabilistic case, except that what was before multiplication of probabilities, so multiplication of scalars, becomes composition of CPM maps. Okay, so that's the game semantics, the quantum game semantics in a nutshell. So let's look to make that a bit more concrete. Let's look at the interpretation of the quantum primitives. So the new primitive has two plays. If we play true, it gives a qubit. If you play false, it also gives a qubit. And the qubit is indistinguishable if you just look at the plays. Where they differ is in the quantum annotation. So the valuation for true is the CPM map that takes a scalar and returns the density matrix with this scalar in the position for true and symmetrically for false. Likewise, if you look at the measure, you will take a qubit and you return true or false. So this part is completely non-deterministic, but the difference is disambiguated with the quantum weights, where if you return true, then along with it, you give the CPM map where you take a density matrix and you project the part that corresponds to the coefficient for true. And for false, it's symmetric. This gives us a model of the full quantum lambda calculus for which we can prove adequacy. Okay, so it's close to conclusion time. So the quantum lambda calculus, the first denotational model for the full quantum lambda calculus was due to Michele Pagani, Peter Selinger, and Benoît Valiron in 2014, and I will call this here the quantum relational model. We gave another model, quantum game semantics, for which we also proved adequacy. So this is the same result. I mean, the relationship between that and the syntax is the same as that of the syntax in the sense that both models are adequate. But our model does have some advantages with respect to this one, namely the fact that we can we observe computation as it progresses over time, means that we can also control locally how the quantum weights increase over time. And this local control means that we can prove that if you have any quantum strategy, the CPM maps that arise as weights for these quantum strategies, up to a rearrangement using the compact closed structure, they are always super operators. So they have good, in particular, convergence properties, which allow us to avoid an infinitary completion that is necessary to build this model. And so that doesn't happen here. But of course, after we got this model, we wanted to link the two, to understand better the link between the two. So intuitively, the difference between the two models is the fact that the quantum relational model only presents completed executions. So it presents completed executions along with the corresponding weight in terms of quantum valuations. Whereas here, we present all the intermediate steps along with their quantum weights. So naively, it seems that one could go from quantum games to the quantum relational model by just forgetting about the intermediate steps and only remembering the end results. And this is morally true. So we gave the details for that in our 2020 paper, where we gave an interpretation preserving functor from quantum games to quantum relations. So as I said, intuitively things work a bit like that. So if you have a strategy and you have completed executions xA and xB, then the weight for this completed execution will be the sum for all the plays, so all the kind of temporal ways to reach this complete execution of the corresponding valuation. But there's a pretty big but here. There's a huge subtlety, which is that in fact, I don't know how to make this work. So in fact, I suspect it cannot be made to work with the sequential games model that I based my talk on today. And this is why we are not using these sequential games. If you look at our papers, things will be quite different. We use instead a notion called concurrent games, which one advantage that they have over sequential games is even already in the classical case, they have a pretty well understood relationship with the relational model. And so there, using concurrent games, you can indeed write this interpretation preserving functor, except the collapse doesn't quite look like this. Instead, it looks like this monster, which I won't comment further on today because I could give 1 or 2 full talks about that. Next, if we looked at this model now based on concurrent games, we were actually able to prove full abstraction for this model. And it's not the concrete intentional model, it's up to an equivalence on strategies. The proof is really nice. I'm really sad I don't have the time to talk about that today. But essentially the smart part of the proof comes from the proof method by Thomas Erhard, Michele Pagani and Christine Tasson in 2015, when they proved that the weighted relational model is fully abstract for probabilistic PCF. Now, because we have this interpretation preserving functor to the quantum relational model, we can deduce from our result that this model was in fact already fully abstract, which was an open problem. So that's about all I have to say for today. So thanks very much for your attention. And I would be happy to answer some questions on the chat. Bye.